It should be, I think, on the windowsill.
Yeah. Oh,
I'll be right back.
just a sec. I'm still. Yeah, I will bring it closer as I'm done.
Side by shade or not? Or side by shade or?
No, it's still transition. So we're in chapter 1, paragraph 13.
I don't know.
Okay, so chapter 1, number 13. Mizbeach and Eis Neisa Elohim Avonim. We learned before that all of the structure of the Beis HaMikdash, both the building.
Is anyone going to be here tomorrow, either morning or afternoon? This machine guy gives me a time. Will there be anyone here?
I'll be until 1. I'll be here.
Okay, anyone here after 1? 1:30. So he has to come before 1. Guaranteed.
Well, we learned that the structure of the Beis HaMikdash, the courtyard, should all be of stone. And if stone was not available, you were able to make it out of bricks. However, there is an exception when it comes to the altar. This is number 13. The Mizbeach, the Eis Neisa Elam, being Avonim, it could only be made of stone. And the hewn stone, that is in parentheses because it could not be shaped in any way. It has to be very natural. And even though the Torah tells us it should be made, Mizbeach Avonim Adomat Tasali, you should make it to be an altar of earth. It means it should be attached to the ground. Could not be built on top of arches nor over tunnels. So the Beis HaMikdash itself, the whole site of the Beis HaMikdash actually was hollowed out for halachic reasons in order that there should not be any impurity from corpse that should come in the vicinity of the Rabbi of the Temple Mount. Therefore, if there was ever a corpse underneath the site of the Beis HaMikdash, they built arches to contain it, and therefore did not continue to go above ground. So the structure of the Harabais of the Temple Mount was on top of arches. There were also tunnels underneath, and the exception was the site where the Mizbeach had to be on solid ground, on the bedrock, and nothing underneath was hollow. It should be attached to the ground. Then when it says the im Mizbeach Avonim, if, what's the if? There's no if. We learned from Allah Moshe Sinai, Sheni Rishus is not a choice, but chayva, that is an obligation that it must be made of stone. So the Mizbeach, the altar, the outer altar that was in the Mishkan, that was made of wood, and it was plated with copper. In the Beis HaMikdash, it was of stone exclusively. Now, the Rambam continues, number 14. Now, what is the condition of the stone that is going to be used for the Mizbeach? So, 14, so any stone that became damaged, to the extent that everyone was to run their nail across the stone, there would not be any nick that their nail would get caught. It had to be that smooth. And he tells you how smooth is that, as Kisakan Shel Shchita. We know that when it comes to the knife that is used for ritual slaughtering, it has to be smooth without any nicks. So much so that you run your nail across the blade, all different directions, and if there is any nick or any hesitation, that is disqualified from using it for ritual slaughter. It has to be corrected. That standard, he tells you, this was something that was known, that Rambam was speaking to those, everyone was familiar with the knife of Shechita. So he says that standard is also used for the stone of the altar. And therefore, if it did get caught in the stone, Sulam, the Kevish Mizbeach, it was disqualified to be used both for the ramp and for the altar itself. As it says, upon Shlemais, it has to be complete. Mizbeach Hashem, you should build the altar of Hashem. So where did you get such smooth stone? So there were two things that were necessary when it came to taking stones. So firstly, it had to be smooth. Secondly, it had to be a stone that had not come in contact with any iron. Usually when there was digging, you use a shovel. Usually when you do chiseling, you use a hammer, a sledgehammer. So where do they get it? The stones for the Mizbeach, Psulas HaKarka, from the earth that was never dug in. You dig until you come to a place. It was not a place that was used for a quarry to take out stones. They took the stones from there that were untouched, or they took it from the Mediterranean, and they built with it. Also, all the stones of the Heichel, of the sanctuary, and also of the courtyard were also perfect. So we're going to learn in the second chapter that they did not use stone that was solid stone for the Mizbeach necessarily. When it came to the stone that was used for the sanctuary and for the courtyard and for the ground, they were very large stones. Usually they were 8 by 10 cubits. So it would be about 16 by 20 feet. Here they used smaller stones, and it was built actually in sections. So we're built in 3 stages. You had the base of the Mizbeach, of the altar, that was 32 cubits by 32 cubits, and it was 5 handbreadths tall. So what they did was they made a mold, and they filled it with stones that are not going to be higher than 5 handbreadths. They filled that whole mold with the stones, and then they filled it in with a filler. It was lead, it was pitch, it was all solid, it became solid, and then they built the next stage on top of that. Also, depending on how high these stones, this stage was going to be, that's how high the stone could be. They also took a number of stones until they filled that mold, and then that was also solidified. Then they built the top. And then they also built the corners in the same way. So therefore, they were able to get stones that were smooth, and also they did not have to get a stone that's going to be 16 feet by 20 feet, where you're going to get that stone that's not going to be quarried out of the mountain, but rather they got natural stones the size that they were able to fill that mold. We'll learn about that when we come to chapter 2. Now, what happens if same would also be with the stones of the temple, the sanctuary, and the courtyard. If there was a defect, they also were either damaged or split, or there would even be, you could catch your nail on the split. So it was disqualified in that pigeon. It was not redeemed. They would put it away in a gniza, just like you put away shemus. So they had a special place for all the stones that were disqualified from the Beis Hamikdash because they became damaged. So they were placed in a special place. And we're going to learn later where the actual place was. Do you have the text in front of you? Are you following, or can I just run along and just say the context of the text? If everyone's following that side, we'll follow the text. If not, we'll just summarize each of these paragraphs. So which one is it working? Okay. Huh? What the text? Okay. Now, this is the continuation of 15. That kol even shenoga b'habatzal. any stone with
In the back of the room, on the right, you have to say,
it was used
and you put a little bit forward for the back. That's it. And I'm reading on the wait side, okay?
In Russian, I don't know. Sorry.
okay.
Very strange.
Okay. So now we're back to the stones of the altar and the ramp. If there was a stone that was going to be used for the ramp or the altar, the outer altar, even though when it came in contact with the iron, it was not defected, still, it becomes disqualified from using either the altar or the ramp that led to the altar. You lifted your sword upon it, and you made it disqualified. If someone did know about this stone, that previously it came in contact with iron, and you did place it to build it into the altar or the ramp, like there was the consequence of lashes. There is a negative commandment not to build them out of stone that was come in contact with iron. Whenever pogrom, if someone uses a stone that did not come in contact with iron, but it was damaged. So if someone did put it into the altar, he transgresses a positive commandment that one should build complete stones. Now the altar is to bring peace to the world, bring peace between husband and wife. Altar was that brought peace to the world, and therefore the sword, primarily iron, was a tool, an instrument of destruction, of damage, harm. Therefore, Torah tells us not to come in contact with that which is going to be free, peace, and also length of years. It brought long life. Not to come in contact with something that shortens the life. The coming of Mashiach, iron will be used in the Beis Hamikdash, because David HaMelech put aside a tremendous amount of iron that was never used. So it was put in storage, and it will be used in the coming of the Beis Hamikdash. So actually, the material that David HaMelech put aside was not used. David HaMelech was hoping that the Jewish people would donate enough on their own, now having to use the treasures that David HaMelech put aside, in order that everyone should have a share in the Beis Hamikdash, rather than he building the whole thing on his own. So that's why we learned last week that by both David is Hashem Le'nei Kol HaKol, David made a great gathering and festive occasion that all the material that was needed was donated by the people. And therefore, he blessed Hashem, thanking that everyone did it with a willing heart, a happy heart. Everyone was happy to participate and be a part of the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, what happens if there is a stone that is placed in the altar that was not fit for the altar? Does it mean that all the other stones are disqualified or not? So the Rambam tells us in Zayin 16 that even by Basel action is what happens if the stone was put into after it was already built, and then it came in contact with iron? Only that stone is disqualified. Everything else is kosher, is fit. That's why we could understand, since it was made of many, many different stones, there could be one stone that did come in contact with the iron, but everything else did not come in contact with, because there were so many different stones that were used as a part of the structure of the altar. And therefore, that stone was disqualified, that stone was removed and was replaced. Twice a year, they whitened the Mizbeach. A Pesach of a Chag, for Pesach and for Sukkot. So they whitened and they put on a plaster cover. Labdan Mapa, they used a cloth to put on the coating. Labor Kavish Basil, but not with a trowel of iron. Why? Because even though there was already a coating over the entire Mizbeach, when you would touch the coating, you were not touching the stone. But Shema Yiga Evan, maybe it will go and penetrate into the coating, and the Yipsil will disqualify that stone. Number 17. You could not make any stairs to the Mizbeach. There's a specific commandment not to ascend my altar with steps. They made a ramp on the southern side of the Mizbeach. We went from the top of the altar to the ground. That is called the ramp. So we have having the altar. So we have the ramp. And this is the structure of the altar as depicted in this diagram. So we will be learning about the different sections of the altar as we learn the second chapter. So here we have the ramp, and there were small ramps coming off from the sides. And so this is the altar, and the ramp also were ascended not by steps, but rather with the ramp. Now, like someone who does ascend with steps or a ladder, the same as steps, the same would be applied to a ladder, like he gets lashes, he transgressed the negative commandment. If someone destroys a stone of the altar, the sanctuary, between the entrance of the sanctuary and the altar, then if he does in a destructive way, like him, there is also consequence of lashes. You should destroy the altars of the idolatry. You should not do the same to God your God. So they had to have respect for the building, that this is a house of Hashem, and therefore treat it with respect. We're going to be learning in a later chapter of how one conducts himself when they are on the Temple Mount. How does one conduct themselves when going there? What are they allowed to, how to be dressed? And other details as well. Number 18. Now the Rambam gave us the material of the building of the altar, the requirement that it must be made of stone. Now the Rambam is going to speak about the other vessels of the Beis HaMikdash, what materials they were made of. And that will include number 18, the menorah and its utensils, shulchan v'kelav, the table that was the showbread and its vessels, and the altar that was used for the incense, and all the sacred utensils, could only be made of metal. What metal? Any metal, as long as it's metal. If it was made either of wood or was made of bone, ebon stone, or glass, sulin, that is disqualified. So it had to be made of metal. But what metal? Any metal was eligible. So you test 19. If they were poor, you could even make them out of tin, which is the cheapest metal. But when they became wealthy, the optimal is you should be made of gold. So if you could make these vessels out of gold, every vessel in the Beis HaMikdash out of gold, then you did so. and even the shovels, mashpudim, and the rakes, and also the basins, the rakes, midas, and even the measuring vessels. If they could afford it, they made it out of gold. Even the gates of the courtyard, they would coat it with gold, being much of Yadim if they could afford it. So here we have that in the Mishkan, we have they were made either of gold or they were plated with gold. So this was something that was done. However, the halacha is that it has to be made out of metal. So if they could only afford tin, and they made a menorah out of tin, so that was a kosher menorah, you could use it. The same thing with the table, the same thing with the altar that was for the incense. However, we were striving towards to make it the most beautiful vessels possible. Chaf, number 20, when you make it initially, it has to have in mind that it's going to be used for the sacred use. So kavana played a role in the making of the vessels. Also, if originally it was made for ordinary use, you did not use it for the temple's sake because it was already made for ordinary use. When it was made originally having the kavanas in mind. This is also what we have with Bezalel. When he made the vessels, he had the secret of the letters of the alphabets, how they were used by Hashem, the creation of the world. Everything in this world has a Hebrew name to it. That is the energy that keeps it in existence. So Bezalel knew all of the secret of these 22 letters and how to apply it when he was the kavanas that he had when the Mishkan was being built. He was able to incorporate these kavanas. So you have the thought, speech, and action, everything being connected in the building. Kli, what happens if you made a vessel that was meant to be used for the temple? Actually, if it wasn't used yet, you could redeem it, and then it could be used for ordinary use. But it had to be redeemed. Since it belongs to the Beis HaMikdash, a person cannot use it for ordinary use. Unless you redeemed it, it was evaluated, you gave its value. So now that money that you gave now became sacred. And the vessel itself now was redeemed if it was never used for the Beis HaMikdash. However, once it was used for the Beis HaMikdash, once used, an ordinary use can no longer ever be used. If it's not going to be used, it will be put away. The Geniza would put away for safekeeping. But to ordinary use, exchange it, that will never be done again. What about there were stone beams that were originally made with intention to make a shul. You could not use it for the Temple Mount construction. And there are two opinions why. One is that the Temple Mount is more holy than a shul. We're speaking about the structure of the shul itself. We're not speaking about the structure of the Beis HaMikdash. We're speaking about that which was used on the Temple Mount. So which was higher? Which was more sacred? That which was used on the Temple Mount or the synagogue? So one opinion is that even the Temple Mount itself, and all the structures that are on Temple Mount, are also more holy than the shul. The other opinion is just the opposite. Since it was designated for a shul, now you cannot use it for the structures that are on the Temple Mount because this is a shul. This is where you're housing Hashem's presence. Also, the Mikdash Ma'at in a small level of sanctuary where the Shekhinah rests there as well. Now we come to chapter 2, and here we have everyone is able to use now we have chapter 2. Everyone has now a copy for this. Those who didn't have chapter 1 now have chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 deals with the altar. Now he's going to tell us, he told us about the material that was used for the altar, and now he's going to say where it should be placed. Chapter 2. The altar is very precise. In the Sharon Eisim and it was never changed. This is the altar that's going to be for the burnt offerings of Israel. This is what was told to David HaMelech. This is the declaration David HaMelech made. He knew that when the angel told him that if he makes an altar on the specific place on the Harabayis on the Temple Mount, on Har Meriah, and that is going to be the designated altar forever. So this is the one that Shlomo HaMelech made. This is also that they had in the second base on Mikdash. They had the prophets who told them where the exact spot where the Mizbeach should be built. And this is also the same place where the altar is going to be built with the coming of Mashiach. Now the Rambam tells us that on this place, Mikdash in the Temple Mount, that is later going to be built, Neked Yitzchak Avinu, this was the place where there was the Akedah, where Yitzchak was prepared to be sacrificed. Shnema, Leflecha, Eretz HaMeriah, go to the land of Meriah. Meriah is Harabayis. We connect it with the Pasuk where Shlomo HaMelech actually builds it, Shnema, B'Yidin HaYamim in Chronicles. Yochel Shlomo Livnas Beis Hashem Yerushalayim, and Shlomo began to build the house for Hashem in Yerushalayim, where Har Meriah and Mount Meriah. Asher Nira LeDavid Avihu. This is where Hashem appeared to David, his father, Asher Heichin, that he prepared the Kohen David Begeven Ornan HaYebusu, the threshing floor of Ornan the Yebusi. That is where David HaMelech prepared the Beis HaMikdash. That is where Shlomo HaMelech began to build the Beis HaMikdash. It's called Har Meriah because Rishon takes a Herol Yisrael from Har Meriah. All the teachings came to all of Israel, as we spoke last week. That site was also where you had the Supreme Court. Supreme Court was in a building, Lishkas HaGazis, and one door was open to Harabayis, the other door was open to the inner courtyard facing the Mizbeach. And Hashem assured, from there, all the teachings are going to be as Hashem wishes. Is going to give them the special Ruach HaKodesh, divine help. They should come to the right conclusion. It was always debated, it was always voted on, and Hashem assured that since it's coming from that place, the conclusion is going to be the correct conclusion. Now, more than just David, this was the place where Avram was ready to bring the sacrifice, the Akedah of Yitzchak, on this designated place. Says B'Yad HaKoel, there was, and it universally accepted, that place where David and Shlomo built the altar in the threshing place of Aravna. This is the exact place where Avram built the altar, and he brought the Akedah, prepared Yitzchak for the sacrifice. So when it says in Chumash that when Noach leaves the Teva, he builds an altar and he brings the sacrifice. Where did he build this altar? Also, this on Har Meriah, on that same designated place where later was going to be the Beis HaMikdash. So they were Nevi'im, they were prophets. So when it came to Avraham Avinu, he was led to the Har Meriah by, there was a cloud, and he was following the cloud, so he knew where to build the altar. When it came to Noach, Noach was a Navi. Hashem communicated with him. So he knew the place that Hashem is going to choose, and that is where he brought his sacrifice. When Cain and Hevel, the sons of Adam and Chava, wanted to show their appreciation of the plenty that Hashem had given them, they also built an altar. They brought there. Cain brings the sheep. He brings the flax. Hevel brings the sheep. Adam HaRishon was created. He also made an altar. He brought a sacrifice to Hashem. Misham Nivra, that is the site from where he was created. Since later, the altar was a place that brings the atonement. So Hashem says he took earth and he formed man. Where did he take the earth from? He took the earth from the site that later was going to be the site where the Mizbeach was to be built. And there, Adam HaRishon built a Mizbeach, built an altar, and there he put sacrifice for Hashem. Number 3. The Rabbi explains that why did the Rambam go into it was something that was publicized and all of mankind were aware. It was universally accepted that that is the place where Adam brought his sacrifice, and Cain and Hevel, and Rayach. Why was that so important that the Rambam has to tell us? The Rabbi explains that, was there ever a place of idols that were set up for the Temple Mount? Was it ever used for idolatry? So he says it was never used for idolatry. Everyone respected that place. Since they knew that this was something that was used for by Adam, Noach, Cain and Hevel, Avraham Avinu, and Avraham Avinu was accepted to them also as a person who's a man of God. So therefore they kept this place sacred, that no one is going to bring their other deities to this place and worship there. So this was something that was sacred, set aside for Hashem. This is a place that Hashem chose later. That's why it's called Beis HaBchira. It's the house that Hashem chooses. Did not choose it because they all brought their sacrifice there. Rather, they were Nevi'im, they were prophets, but they prophesied that later this is going to be a place where Hashem is going to choose. The size, the dimensions of the Mizbeach is very precise. It was handed down from one to the other, from generations. When so the first Beis HaMikdash, we learned that were blueprints. This was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, it was handed down from generation to generation until it came to Shlomo HaMelech. And he used the blueprints and actually physical blueprints that he built, and he knew how to build an altar because he looked at the blueprints and all the instructions were there. Now, what about when they came after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, they came back to, after 70 years, they came to build the second Beis HaMikdash and to build an altar there. How did they know what to do? So they built it with the dimensions that were in the Nevuah, in the prophecy of Yecheskel. Yecheskel describes the Mizbeach, and that is what they built for the second Beis HaMikdash. Not the same as Shlomo HaMelech for the first Beis HaMikdash, but rather that which Yecheskel speaks about, the third Beis HaMikdash. And you cannot make it any larger or smaller than that which was designated. How did they know how to do this? Dalit. There were 3 prophets, Chagi, Zechariah, Malachi, who came also to Eretz Yisrael. Since first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, there was no remnant, but they were able to see where the Mizbeach was. So how did they know the exact place where to build an altar? So the Navi mapped it out for them. Show them where the exact place where the altar should be built. One of them also testified, what are the dimensions? Should they make it the same size as was in the first Beis HaMikdash, or should they make it the dimensions that are in Yecheskel? So he told them it's going to be like Yecheskel. The base is 32 by 32, which is Lamed Beis, which spells out Lev. The Mizbeach, the altar, represents the emotional attachment to Hashem, which is Lev, which is the heart, a heartfelt connection to Hashem. And also there's the fire on the altar, a fiery connection to Hashem. And also the third one said they could start the service in the Beis HaMikdash immediately. You did not have to wait till the sanctuary was built and the walls were placed, but immediately could start bringing the sacrifice, because the site of the Beis Hamikdash, its site, the holiness never left. The Shekhinah was always on Har HaBayis. Therefore, since the holiness was there, he testified that now, even though you don't have the structure, but it's an invisible Beis Hamikdash that is there. You could bring the kabbanis, you could build the altar and bring the sacrifice now. So the Rambam tells us in number Hey, there are different, there's the height and there's the length and width. As far as the Mizbeach that was made by Moshe Rabbeinu, Shlomo HaMelech, and those who came out of Golus by the second Beis Hamikdash, and the Hasid Lahasis, the one that's going to be made in the future by Moshiach, Kulon Eser Ames Goyba Kol Echad Mehem. The height did not change. It's the length and width that changed, but the height were all the same. So we have that special concept of the height, which is Eser Ames, 10 cubits high. So there's a special significance in the number 10. We learned about the Chassidus, about the 10 Midah, the 10 Sfiras. When it says it was 3 cubits high, it does not mean the whole altar was. It's only the section where you actually had the wood was arranged. And the Mizbeach that those who came out of Golus and the one that's going to be built, Midas Okai, what is the length and width? Lamed Beis Amos, Lamed Beis Amos, 32 cubits by 32 cubits. That's the base of the Mizbeach. Now the Rambam tells us that when we have the 10 Amos of the height of the Mizbeach, so we have a cubit, but there were 2 different cubit size. Cubit, the larger cubit was 6 handbreadths. Smaller cubit was 5 handbreadths. This was incorporated when they built the altar. There was a section that had the smaller cubits, and there was a section that had the larger cubits. So the bottom base was 5 handbreadths. The top, which were the corners of the Mizbeach, that they had corners to them. See that it has the 4 corners. They have like a little. They're called the upper part of the Mizbeach. It just had 4 hollow corners. So that is also a part of the height. That was also the height of that corner was 5 handbreadths, a cubit of 5 handbreadths. So you have the very bottom, the ledge, that was 5 handbreadths. The very top was 5 handbreadths, and everything in between was the 6 handbreadths. So normally, if it would have been 6 all through, 6 times 10 should have been 60 handbreadths. But since we have the top and the bottom were only 5, we're missing 2 handbreadths, so therefore the height of the Mizbeach of the altar was the 58 handbreadths. So this is number 6. Esa Amos shall go down Mizbeach, the 10 cubits, that was the height of the Mizbeach, Mehem Amo Bas Hamisha Tvachim, what cubit that measured the 5 handbreadths, Mehem Amo Bas Shisha Tvachim, and those that were cubit of 6 handbreadths. Anything else that was built was 6 handbreadths. He used a larger the larger cubit. Therefore, the Rambam tells us the height of this Mizbeach was 58 tefachim. So let's see. let's take, let's have the diagram and we're going to follow it as we go along. You actually have this also diagram that you have on the text itself. I think it's easier to see the, when using this. Do we have enough there? Okay, so let's follow Zion 7. This is the dimensions and design as follows. You go up 5 handbreadths. Then we're also going to have, that is going to be the Konas Chamishat Tvachim, and it goes in 5 handbreadths, and it's going to form a step that's called the base. So here we see that as it's going higher, it's gradually getting smaller because there are the different bases that's a ledge. But the ledge itself also has the width to it. So it goes up 5 handbreadths, and then it has the ledge until the next section comes. It's also going to be 5 handbreadths of space, of a base. Therefore, the remainder, nimtza reichav shleishim amo shnei tvachim reichav shleishim amo shnei tvachim. So now we have the width has been diminished by the 5 handbreadths on each side. And then all shleishim tvachim, then you go to the next section, it's going to be 30 handbreadths that we see in our diagram. So it goes up 30. And then the konas chamishat tvachim, then there's another ledge that's going to be 5 handbreadths. That is considered the surrounding ledge. So if we look at the bigger diagram, let's see if you have it here as well. On the second page, you can see where they have the structure. So you see the base, and then you see the little ledge that's around it. So you're able to, then it goes up to 30 tvachim, and then you see another ledge around it that's called a seibib. You're able to surround the mizbeach. You can go around. And then then it goes 18 handbreadths. That is the section of where the wood is placed. Its width was 28 cubits and 4 handbreadths. By 28 and 4 handbreadths. And Allah Shmeid Asa Tvachim, we just had that. Then it had in the 4 corners, it had a structure that was hollow, square, with all 4 corners. And that is going to be it is a cubit by a cubit, that's going to be the larger one. And the Kohanim had a place where they were able to walk around. It was 1 cubit. Where the wood was kept, 24 and 4 handbreadths by 24 and 4 handbreadths. So here you see where there's, in the second diagram, you see there is the section between one corner and the other, and then there is another section that is colored differently. That shows that is a place where the Kohanim were able to walk around, where there was never wood placed there, because you could see a Kohen standing in the designated place. And it was miraculous that a Kohen was able to stand there. We're speaking about the fire that was burning. The filler was made out of lead and pitch and stone. Now imagine if you were going to stand on a place that was heated by fire that's made out of lead and pitch. How could you, and you were walking barefooted. It had to be someone who was able to walk on fire. But Hashem made it, that was part of the miracles that took place on the Mizbeach. So among the miracles that took place on the Mizbeach, the Gemara tells us in the Masechta Yuma that there was The Gemara tells us, this is in Yuma, page 21b. The Gemara says there were 5 things concerning the fire that was on the altar, the outer altar. When the fire, I'm reading now from the Talmud. This is page 22b from Sefta Yuma. Yuma means the day which deals with Yom Kippur. So when the Shlomo Melech built the altar, fire came down, and it was the form of a lion. So it was like an angel, the form of a lion that was on the altar. It was as bright as the sun. Yesh Mamish, it actually had substance to it. It was a fire. And Veicheles Lachen V'Yevation. He was able to consume whatever was put on the altar, it would consume it. There was no smoke. That was the fire that was on the altar. So when we have the daily sacrifice that was brought, we have that in our davening, that we say it daily. On page 22 in our siddur, we have the daily sacrifice that is exclaimed, that we say is a part of our davening. And there was the morning sacrifice and afternoon sacrifice. And whatever limbs were not consumed during the daytime, were not placed on the altar during the daytime, that were not placed on the fire, that was done through the night. So corresponding to that, we have Shachris, our morning davening. We have Mincha, our afternoon davening. We have Ma'ariv, we have the evening davening, corresponding to the sacrifice that was brought in the Beis HaMikdash. So in the Beis HaMikdash, we had the Kohen, who represents mankind. We had the lamb that represents all of the animal world. Then we had a Korban Mincha, a gift offering, which was also daily, that consisted of flour and oil, that represents, and the wine that was brought on the altar, that represents the vegetable world. And then there was the salt that was placed with every sacrifice that represented the inanimate. So on a daily basis, there was an elevation for all of the world, including all the inanimates, vegetation, the animal, and mankind. And this was all brought on the altar, but we have also the, on a daily basis, we had also the elevation of the lower waters. It says when Hashem created the world, it was before the separation of the second day, everything was spiritual. Upper waters, lower waters, that's was all spiritual. Hashem made the separation the second day. Upper waters remained spiritual, the lower waters became physical. And the Medrash tells us, the lower waters were crying, and he said, we want to be attached to Hashem. What happened to us? We were so close to Hashem, we were spiritual, we were godly, and now look what happened to us, we're physical. So Hashem said that we will have that opportunity to be elevated even to a higher level than you were before by being brought on the altar. Because with every sacrifice there was salt. The salt was an ocean derivative that was a derivative of the waters. And then 7 days of the year, there's going to be actually water being placed on the Mizbeach, on the altar. That's going to be an elevation for all the waters of the world. And it's going to bring also prosperity and also everything that's going to grow. This is by being brought. And that's what we have the Simchas Beis HaShe'evam, the celebration. There was no greater celebration that was done when it came to the celebration of the pouring of the water on the altar. And there were two places that one was for the wine, one was for the water. Let's see if you see it in this diagram. Can't see it here. Okay, we have another diagram for that. So this was something that, so we have that opportunity when we have a meal, we have bread, also have all of that, which we have the salt, we have the bread, you have the person who's making the bracha. He is the one who's bringing that elevation, that place of the of our meals and also our davening. So I guess we have this next class takes over after this. Is there a class following this?
No.
This is, no?
Just one and
It was on, so last week it was I was told to finish on time. What was
Yeah,
what
no,
was
it
that?
was one time.
Huh?
That's one time.
One at a time. Okay. So anyway, could I finish the?
Yeah.
So our davening takes the place of the sacrifice, and it's interesting that we call the davening, we call our prayers, we call Shachris is morning, Arvis is night. So what should have been the middle one? Should have been called Saharayim, like we say in Shemona Esrei that we daven 3 times a day, Erev, Bavaykel, Saharayim. But we do find that it's called Mincha. What was the Mincha? Mincha was a gift, something that's you take away from that's what you want to share, something that you do with pleasure. This is also what the mincha is meant to be. Shacharis is in the morning, we get up in the daytime, we haven't been involved with the world yet. Ma'ariv is at the end of the day, we finish the day. Mincha is in the middle of the day. And when we take time from mincha, even though we're in the midst of doing something very important, we take the time to daven mincha, that is a gift that we do that out of love to Hashem. That's why it says that this is the one that Eliyahu Hanavi was answered. So when was he answered? He was answered by mincha time. He said, Aneni Hashem, Aneni, answer me Hashem, answer me. That was done, and Hashem came down with a fire and shows that he is, that they had the contest between the prophets of the Baal and Eliyahu Hanavi. And when was he answered? When he came to mincha. This is the specialty that mincha has. We have that opportunity to daven. We're able to, the Yalkut Shemaya tells us that the dream of Yaakov Avinu, so there are many different interpretations that the Medrash tells us. What is the significance of the ladder? The Sulam Mutzav outside, a ladder is standing on the ground, and the top is reaching the heavens. The angels are going up and down. And Hashem is standing above him. So many different interpretations, whether it refers to Har Sinai, but one interpretation, the first one that it is that it refers to davening. Sulam Mutzav, the Beis Hamikdash and the Mizbeach. Sulam Mutzav Atzam, the ladder is the kevesh, is the ramp. When you bring the sacrifice, it goes to the highest of the heavens. And Malachi Elakim Elam Yerdim Boy, you have the Kayanim who bring the sacrifice, and then you have the Tfilis, the korban that goes up, where we had that the lion angel consumed the animal that was brought on the altar. So what happened to that animal? Lamb was placed on the altar. You had the flour and the oil was placed on the altar. So what happened to them? They were consumed by this lion. So what happened to it? What happened when the lion, the angel in the form of a lion that was on the altar consumed the sacrifice? So what happened to that sacrifice? It became godly. It became a part of this godly fire. So this was the ability that happened to the elevation that took place was in such a level. We have that opportunity as well when we do our davening. When we learn later about the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, we have the courtyard, we have the entrance to the Beis Hamikdash, then we have the inner room, then we have a Kodesh HaKadoshim. The davening that we daven corresponds different parts of the davening. One of them is the courtyard, one of them is the entranceway, one of them is the sanctuary, and one is going into Kodesh HaKadoshim, that is Shemona Esrei. And then there's also, as a result of our davening, we also bring down all of that which we achieved, bring it down to this world. I want to share with you a diagram. I hope you will appreciate it, of our davening. I think it tells us the parts of davening. It's in Hebrew, so you could I will go through it right now. I don't know if the people are still on Zoom or.
We in Zoomer land cannot see it, Rabbi Barass, if we can.
Listen, I think we could, why don't we, are you able to post this on? You're not able to? Huh?
Yeah, we're gonna turn that now.
Okay, we're going to have this diagram on our Zoom. Okay, so if we look at it, we have the direction that our davening goes up, the direction that our davening, the results of our davening come down. So we have in the bold letters, we have Asiya, the four worlds, Asiya, Yetzira, Bria, and Atzilus. Then we have on the right side going up. When we say the brachas, the morning brachas, when we say all the korbanos, we've gone to the world of Asiya, Hagufnit. Then the next step is Pesukah Zimra. This verse of song is corresponds to Olam HaYetzirah. Then we go, that is from Baruch Shiyomar until Yishtabach and everything in between. So we've now entered the world of Yetzirah, which is the world of emotions. That's why it's called verse of song. Song usually brings out an emotion when a person is singing, whether it is happiness or reflective, whatever the tune is, that's how a person feels. It brings out his emotions. So the Sukkot Zimra, the verse of song between Baruch Shiyomar and Yishtabach, is meant to be sung. Then we come to the next stage, which is Bria, the world of Bina, of understanding. That is the blessings of Shema and the Shema itself. That is where we reflect, we have a deep understanding of Hashem's connection to us, to our neshama, and to the world. And then we enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Holy of Holies, which is Shemona Esrei, which is Atzilus. Then we continue on the day that there's Tachnun, that's also in Atzilus. We come down, we bring down all that which we have achieved, all the godliness and all the godly energy that we've reached, that the Hashem has reached through our davening. And our davening itself also is devoured by an angel. Just as on the Mizbeach, there was the lion that consumed the korban. So there's also in Kabbalah, it also says that we say the words and an angel repeats these words and takes that which we have offered and makes the best of it. In other words, we give the diamond, the size of the diamond, sometimes not so, it's not sparkling yet. So the angel repeats the words that we have said and sparkles it up, that it gets the maximum, that the word that we said shines the maximum way. And with it, it makes crowns for Hashem. It makes these precious stones that we have presented, and we make a crown for Hashem on a daily basis. So the angels, the same as we had that lion that consumed the korban and made it angelic, the same thing is also we have angels that are having our words and making them in a perfect way. So this is also, we have my Mom Dalta Rebbe that speaks about this explicitly. We say in Nishmas, Kol Kravi Hashem Kachai, my intestines also praise Hashem. So just as the intestines take care of all the foods that we eat, the same thing, we have the angels who are take care of the thoughts that we have, the extraneous thoughts, they are discarded. We're taking only the perfect part of our davening is presented. So then we go, bring it down from Atzilus back to Bria. Asher Yevolotzion is going to the bringing it down to Bria. Then the Tefillah L'Dov Neshil Shel Yaim brings it to El Mayitzira. And Kaveh, Enkel Ekeinu and Aleinu brings it down to our world. It says that the Magid used to make a special minyan just for Kaveh and Aleinu, because that's bringing down all that which was achieved, bringing down to the physical world, and brought it down. So, come well. And you should know every word is precious. What we put in, what we.
Thank you very much.
Caroline.